looking at the two women seated by her. They have been placed in front of a freight car, which in German states that it is carrying furniture, furnishing materials, and other domestic accessories like lighting equipment. And we, as the recipients of this picture, are wondering, what do those living people have to do with inert materials or the objects that the train supposedly is carrying? The locale is Nuremberg, whose name you can make out on the picture from the U umlaut, the R, and the ERG, on the car just behind the two standing women. It is from Nuremberg where the women will be transported or deported like soulless objects. Because it is 1942, and because in the last 10 years of Germany's Third Reich, the Jews, along with other degenerate, quote-unquote, minorities, have been turned into non-human things. Just a few months before the taking of this picture, at the Wannsee Conference of January 20th, 42, the annihilation of Europe's entire 9 million Jewish population had been decided on. They have been objectified. The prideful existence of the picture itself speaks volumes, for it is the culmination of the yearly nationalistic Nuremberg official party day rallies of the 1930s, held to consolidate the one political party of hatred allowed in Nazi Germany. This city also gave its name to the Nuremberg racist laws that ripped away the citizenry status of these undesirable citizens. And if you see this stoutish woman, she comes from the Oberpfalz. She comes not that far away from Bayreuth, the great Waldner Festival, and that family that she's a member of was Schutzjuden for hundreds and hundreds of years. They lived in Germany, protected by the reigning monarchs. Two things strike me about the picture: the dignity of these all too human and soulful women, and the fact that this photo is an official one, thus reflecting the pride of the Nazis in practicing genocide. The enormity of the Nazi Holocaust, its vast scale, is its uniqueness. That such a cultured nation as the Germany of the 20th century could annihilate millions of fellow human European citizens with such efficiency and with well-scheduled trains running from all over Europe to the death camps of Poland. That the Nazi Germans knowledgeably and openly followed an eliminationist politics on a continent-wide scale is their path-breaking, devolutionary contribution to human barbarism. In this picture, taken at a transit camp just on the outskirts of Nuremberg, it's taken at Nuremberg Langwasser, which is just by the zoo, which is interesting how they regarded their Jewish population. These human women have been waiting 2 days to board a train car for things. But as the trains were being run by the German government, they each had to pay a sum of 50 Reichsmark for transportation in an overcrowded cattle car, and a 10-mark supplement for food. This for relocation, a Nazi euphemism for murder. But the actual train car you see behind my grandmother is from a local Nuremberg train used to make the victims, or take the victims to their holding pen, that is, to the transit camp. At this transit camp, the Nazi functionaries were, and this is Nazi jargon, were officially preparing the prisoners to be ready for travel. As the Nazis said, amtlich präpariert und reisefertig. Upon the victims' arrival at the transit camp, they had to surrender any valuable items they might have on them. And the guards, according to their post-World War II court testimony, both got the confiscated gold, silver, and jewelry items as prizes in their tombola or bingo game in the evening at the transit camp prior to this, the second of would what would be 3 Nuremberg deportations. The first one was in November 41 to Riga, Latvia. The second one is this, in Izbica, Poland. And the third one was 4 months later to people over 60 to Theresienstadt, the camp outside of Prague for older citizens. And they also, the guards also viewed in the evening the Gestapo commissioned film of the roundup of the Nuremberg Jews from the first deportation to Riga in November of 41. In taking the shifting emotional temperature of my grandparents' letters, I will be leaning heavily on the findings of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose work with terminally ill patients she wrote up in her 1993 book on death and dying. I use her work because the Holocaust, with its absolute eliminationist ends, was like a terminal illness for its victims. There was no way out but death. In her study, Kubler-Ross takes note of the changing attitudes of her patients as they approach death. They travel from the first stage of denial to the second stage of anger, to the third stage of bargaining and depression, and finally to an acceptance. And in my grandparents' 2 years of letters, their shifting attitudes often parallel these findings. I would like to look with you at 2 excerpts from the first letters that my mother saved. They, with their themes of denial, would continue for the following half a year to come. What denial? That my grandparents resisted in realizing that they were so late in the process of immigrating to America. From September of 39, Germany and the other Axis powers were at war and isolated from the foreign countries in North and South America, as well as from the British Mandate of Palestine, all places that my grandparents desperately were considering immigrating to. Denial as they were so late. Do not forget that in 1933, when the Nazis had come to power, the professionals, the people in medicine, in law, in education, were encouraged to leave the Third Reich because their licenses to work had been revoked. They were permitted only to practice their professions under severely constricted circumstances. Merchants, like my grandfather, could continue to ply his trade, selling tailoring materials to Jewish stores, and his business as a financial concern was not only impacted, but enjoyed financial prosperity in the beginning years of the Third Reich. My grandparents' sense of denial unfortunately helped them to read signals incorrectly. My grandfather was convinced that the Nazis would not harm him because he, like thousands of other honorably discharged Jewish World War I veterans, held a special protected position and no harm would be inflicted. And sadly, what happened on the evening of the 9th of November, 1938, the Germany-wide Kristallnacht, the Crystal Night, during which over 300 synagogues were set afire and demolished, unfortunately reaffirmed his faulty sense of rationalizing. When Nazi stormtroopers entered my grandparents' apartment in downtown Nuremberg, they saw all of Jonah Ulfelder's honorably discharged papers from the Kaiser's army placed carefully in good order on the apartment's center dining room table. It was their commanding officer who said that my grandfather and his family would not be touched, although that evening thousands of other Jews across Germany were being arrested. That my grandparents, within the following months, would have to move to a Jewish house in a Jewish ghetto at an outlying part of town gave the lie to this SS man's statement. Because they had remained too long in Germany, their attempts to secure safe passage and to leave Nazi Germany by 1939, coded by their denial as a defense mechanism, achieve genuine poignancy. The gender-specific nature of my grandparents' traditional European marriage of 25 years is revealed in the different topics that each covers in the correspondence. My grandfather, the businessman, is statistically obsessed with financial details and the actual technicalities of the immigration process of getting out. Please follow this direct quote from his letter of February 6, 1940, Roman numeral 2, sent to my parents, then living in Sweden. Quote, just now, an emerging new chance to get to Palestine might be a possibility, and via the Hamburg-America line, I will book passage tomorrow. I cannot foresee that this will work out, but I will leave no stone unturned. One has to have relatives or friends who already reside abroad to pay the down payment of $100 American per person, telegraph to Switzerland, and we here have to pay 600 marks to Hamburg, the Hamburg-American line. This trip would be tremendously dangerous. I actually believe that before we undertake this voyage, we, with our favorable immigration quota number, will be able to land in New York and to be together with our relatives there. Actually, Chile offers no hope, and it is the same for Cuba. And don't you both be discouraged about this. Jonah Ofelder's hope, placed in that, quote, favorable number for a U.S. visa, was a denial of the ever so few Jewish immigrants the United States was actually accepting because of the profoundly anti-Semitic policies of the Department of State. The United States was loath to accept the release of tens of thousands of European Jews. As the American historian from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, David Wyman, has written, quote, the policy of the United States was to obstruct rescue possibilities and to dampen the public pressure for governmental action. The writer-survivor Elie Wiesel has said, quote, proud as we are of the generosity that America showed in fighting against Nazi Germany, we are embarrassed and dismayed by its behavior toward Hitler's Jewish victims. If my grandfather vainly sought any kind of workable deal to get out, my grandmother's voice is decidedly complimentary. Her thoughts are primarily on the 3 generations of her family and the life abroad that she and her husband could lead if they could flee. She is thinking domestic. She encourages my parents to write to her octogenarian father. She's inquisitive of whether the quilted comforter she has just sent to my mom in Stockholm is allowing her to sleep better, and she forever voices her frustrations about the little they are hearing by mail from their other daughter in Tel Aviv. Germany being at war already with all of the British Empire, including Palestine. She's jubilant when she can locate an address of a family friend temporarily in Italy on her way to Palestine, to whom she can mail a letter eventually meant for that daughter. She also speaks about having to move to smaller, humbler quarters where the Nuremberg Jews will be housed. But as far as her plans for their immigration are concerned, her form of denial is just as strong as that of her husband's. Please read with me Roman numeral 3, an excerpt dated April of 1940. Hear my grandmother's thoughts about her would-be life away from Germany get center stage. She would like to make a living as a 50-year-old together with my father's mother, who had just successfully arrived in New York City in 1939, sponsored by her son, my paternal uncle, who had been living in the United States since 1929. In those days, you needed a sponsor to immigrate to the States, and he also was the sponsor for my folks, but because he was no blood relative of my maternal grandparents, he could not help them. And she says in this Roman numeral 3, quote, I have just written to your other mother about when we will be together in New York. Together we can take in boarders and care for all of you at the same time. That will allow all of you to be earning your income at jobs outside the home, and we too can take care of the house.